Welcome, everybody, and a special welcome to all of you who are in a Pocket Project event for the first time and have come from the Collective Trauma Summit to find out more about our work here. We are really delighted to feel that there is a next circle of people joining. And this is really a part of growing our global healing movement. You know, we partner with many other organizations, and at the same time, here in the Pocket Project, which is the NGO in the field of the work of Thomas Hübl, we also provide many spaces for us to connect more deeply to each other and to support each other as we go on this journey. And the specific call today is coming to you as an invitation, part of our invitation to you. We are opening our doors again for the second time. We had a first cycle of international labs and in the international labs, we look at specific areas, geographic or thematic, of collective trauma. And we work together to soften those areas of trauma and to, in a way, allow a place through our bodies for them to soften. So it's a very intimate process of being with a specific area of the world, of the pain of the world, but also always the resourcing of the world at the same time. And we went through a cycle back then. You can learn more about the previous cycle of labs also on our website. And we're just about to announce our next cycle of labs. So this is the first call to bring to you more information about this journey. And we also hope that for those of you, especially who were part of the Collective Trauma Summit this year or in previous years, that the call today will give you some insight into this flow of collective trauma integration, collective trauma healing, and also for us that we learn more from you and learn from your questions, but also your insights. Yeah, so my name is Kasia Joubert, and I have served now as CEO of the Pocket Project for the past 3 years, just over 3 years now, 3.5 years. And before that, I served as CEO of the Global Eco-Village Network. So I come with a rich taste and experience for the globality of our humanity and the incredible good intentions that we as humans carry in our hearts and aim to bring to the world. And I think what made me shift my work from the Restorative Communities Network, the Global Eco-Village Network, to the Pocket Project was that the painful constriction in manifesting our high dreams and our visions in the world was just so obvious in the beautiful communities, the beautiful projects, but also the global networks that I was a part of. And I became more and more fascinated by turning and looking at the sand in the system. And I've been traveling with Thomas now for 19 years. So I met Thomas in 2004. And yeah, together we also held a conference on the power of collective wisdom in Berlin in 2008. And then there was a real shift as we were looking at the power of collective wisdom, where Thomas really made the shift to say, well, you know, it's beautiful to look at the possibility of collective wisdom. But as we do that, we need to look at what is in the way. So that is why we are here together and what we bring our hearts towards. And it's really an act of love to say, I'm willing not only to look at where the resourcing and the beauty and the music and the dance and all of that lies, but also to look at the pain points that we carry. Yeah, and we're with the collective trauma integration work. This butterfly, caterpillar to butterfly images is really fitting. And I know that many of you are deeply trauma informed already. So I'm just bringing a few concepts to bring us all on the same page. So our understanding of trauma is that it's an inner response to an experience when an experience is overwhelming for our nervous system, when the content of the experience and the emotional response in us is too intense to flow through and be grounded. And often when we're with others that can help us co-regulate, like after an accident, if somebody is with us and holds us and helps us, we might be able to process a lot more intensity than when we feel ourselves alone. So it's not just the intensity of the experience, it's also the collective level of care and togetherness that impacts how much trauma is created. But what happens is that when trauma is not integrated during the event or soon after the event, it can become long-lasting and walk with us, not just through our own individual lives, but also over generations and be passed on from generation to generation. As Thomas Hübel says, collective trauma is an invisible yet formative ingredient for the structures that emerge in our cultures and societies, and that we tend to take for granted. And Gabor Mate speaks about the myth of normal. Yeah, so in our work, we believe that trauma is at the root of many of the crises that we see at the moment in the world. You know, that at the root of these lies the personal and the collective trauma, but also deeper, you know, beyond this life into past lives, the historic and the ancestral trauma of generations and generations and generations that walked before us, so that we are walking on an archaeological layering. And in our field, we specifically look at 3 main areas of trauma: individual trauma, and all of our nervous systems are so sensitive when we come on this planet, you know, freshly born into this 3-dimensional world. Who knows from where our soul beings incarnate? And the small body, the small nervous system is so sensitive that every place where we are not met, where our nervous system is not met by the open song of another nervous system that is able to feel us, we run into stress. It stresses us when there's nobody to hold us, when we're hungry, when we're cold. Yeah, and even worse, when we face the stark expression of trauma, you know, that comes to us sometimes through abuse, through neglect. So we all suffer in various degrees through the marks that left in this nervous system up to today. And also we all carry in our nervous systems the fine threads that come from our ancestries. And I should name already now loudly and clearly that what we're speaking about here, these threads that come to us, and this flow that flows through us or doesn't flow in places that, maybe it's not 50-50, but that there's huge parts of resourcing that come to us from our own individual learning, our inner soul wisdom that we carry. We all carry a lot of resourcing, but also from our ancestries. Everything that has been learned, all the wisdom that has been integrated, all the ways that previous generations and rich cultures, indigenous cultures around the world learned to work and integrate collective trauma is sitting here between us and with us today. So we have individual trauma and individual resourcing, ancestral trauma and ancestral resourcing. And we have collective trauma and collective resourcing. Yeah, and collective trauma is really the combined collective field of effects of all the individual and all the collective trauma that is carried in a specific group of people. And these effects are then meeting new, fresh trauma, acute trauma in the world, and either able to integrate it with resourcing or reacting and creating more trauma from a traumatized place. Now, coming back to these deep roots, we understand that ecosystem restoration, like restoring the fabric of biodiversity, of resilience in the ecosystems around us, goes hand in hand with collective restoration. The restoration of the fine social fabric that lies between us as human beings. And a lot of work is currently done. It's still the UN decade for ecosystem restoration. And we believe that we need a decade for collective restoration to walk hand in hand with that ecosystem restoration. Yeah, and both are imbued by us human beings learning more and more deeply about ethical restoration, ethical alignment, ethical care. And we'll share more about that as we move on. Yeah, so, and I hope it's okay that I share more. I'm just going to make sure I have the chat on here so I can, sorry, I just put it on here so I have it on the side of my screen and I can see. So you could also write if something is not clear or you have a question or I'm going too slow or too fast for you, let me know. Yeah, but our work is directed, and I'm sure you will have heard this during the summit or in other places, to shift humanity from implementing again and again traumatizing systems. We know it as individuals in our most intimate relationships where we can find ourselves in the same conflicts again and again, to becoming trauma-informed in our communities, our institutions, our societies. We're right now across the globe seeing huge cycles of trauma repetition, traumatizing wars, destructive patterns. Yeah, and shifting to trauma-informed and then to trauma integrating systems. Yeah, and in many of our collective trauma integration work, we need to acknowledge that the collective trauma that we've collected over centuries is so hot, so thick. Ice, as Thomas calls it, it's like icebergs that we're standing on. And as we start to do this work, it can feel overwhelming. It's as if we're working on the surface, and we've seen that in the past decade, maybe with the Black Lives Matter movement and the anti-racism movement, that there's such a thick layer that it's like we can't just move to trauma integrating systems. We're still learning to own, learning to acknowledge, learning to be with the reality of what was and what is, learning to see each other more deeply. And there's a lot of trauma-informed acknowledgement that is needed before we can even step towards trauma integrating. So it's a melting of the ice, and it's a melting of the upper layers of the ice that allow us to come to the deeper layers. But we also know that there is, or let's say it's our belief, it's our hope, it's our deep knowledge that in natural systems there is a natural tendency to heal, to lean towards healing. And why do we know that? Because as soon as we are in a space that is safe enough, our nervous systems naturally start detoxing. So if we're with another person who provides a deep sense of, let's call it polyvagal presence, ventral vagal safety, my nervous system really having the space to host you, even when you're going through difficult, challenging emotions. Our nervous system starts to detox. And the same is true in collective spaces. As soon as we create spaces that are safe and coherent enough, issues start showing themselves. So this is, in a way, a wonderful thing about collective trauma integration work, that we don't have to work hard, go digging deep to find the trauma. We can stay with what is and what feels safe enough to show itself. And I just see Martin just asked a question, came to me personally, but he asked, what is the difference between trauma-informed and trauma-integrating? Yeah, and I think, this is a very fluid continuum that we're speaking about here, So I can be, I'll give an example just from private situation. I can be with my partner and have a reaction to something he said and flash out at him with anger and self-protectiveness. And that in itself is slightly traumatizing. It could be a traumatizing response for him. It can trigger his young child aspects so that he in turn becomes protective and hits back. And immediately we're in a traumatizing, or what we could call slightly traumatizing exchange. And when we become trauma informed, I would say it means we notice. And often it brings us to a place of not knowing. So I realize that my reaction would be a trauma repetition, and I don't yet quite know how to respond. But maybe I stay silent and I host more, and a moment of spaciousness emerges between us, where we are both a bit surprised that we're not following the old patterns. I would call that a trauma-informed moment, not blindly repeating the past. And then trauma integration goes a step further, where we can actually feel each other in those wounded young parts and invite each other to express them in healing ways. And also have the sharing space that helps us integrate the learning from those places. So it includes post-traumatic growth. Yeah, and as I see you, Ayana, just come on. Yes, we did speak about the current situation. And yeah, we're practicing together here to create a safe space with each other. And you might just feel how this is with you now. Yeah, and as the Pocket Project, we're developing trauma relief projects to bring to the current hot spaces. And I'll share more about that at the end of the call and through the call. Yeah, so some key facts or insights just to remind us: the past can never be forgotten. So there's this saying, the past heals all things, or time heals all wounds. Time heals all wounds. And we would simply say that is not true. Time does not heal all wounds, but some wounds may go deep into the underground. But the past can never be forgotten. It is carried with us in unconscious ways and can only be acknowledged, digested, integrated, and then finally restored. Yeah, both resourcing and trauma, the integrated learning, also post-traumatic growth, and the unintegrated wounds heal us, our relationships, our collective. Individual, ancestral, and collective trauma are deeply entangled. I was born and grew up in South Africa under apartheid, and my individual trauma is deeply entangled with my ancestral trauma. The trauma inflicted by my ancestors is part of that, a big part of that, and by the collective trauma that I grew up in. And our healing progresses the more we integrate individual trauma, the more we are able to start working with ancestral and collective trauma. Yeah, and we see it as an integral part of our citizens' responsibility to turn towards the wounds that we carry. And I applaud each of you for coming here tonight, because I know and I believe that this is the time where we're waking up to this responsibility. And that it's our care and our love that allows us to sit in the uncomfortability of turning towards and not turning away. And in that, of course, we need to always take care of our resourcing first. But also the deep knowledge that our ethical evolution as humanity is frozen in the ice of collective trauma. We are not able to find the solutions to the climate crisis, the solutions to the crisis in the Middle East, the solutions to the war in Ukraine. When we're sitting on top of all these layers of ice, it needs a melting together so that the solutions can grow through us. Yeah, and I just want to invite us all, as we practice, like as a first step, bringing, let's say, trauma-informedness to our world, to just learn to notice, where do I feel, speak, and act from a resource place, and where from a traumatized place? And how can I create spaces to support myself in both? And also learning to notice where our relationships, organizations, and societies are shaped from a resource place or from a traumatized place. And this in itself is very precious. Yeah, at the heart of this preciousness sits the instrument of our body. And I already spoke, when I speak about the entanglement of the individual, ancestral, and collective, this is literally sitting here in the room, also in the song that our bodies sing together, our nervous systems sing together in this room. This is our incredible tool that we keep cultivating and keep coming back to. And with this, we move into the 6 core stages of collective trauma integration. And I'll go through each of them just briefly. And also to just say that as we prepare for the next round of international labs, the lab journeys will be from January to December 2024. And each lab will have its very unique journey. We're expecting to have around possibly up to 30 different labs addressing specific areas of collective trauma, geographic or thematic. And each of these will have a very unique journey, and yet they will all connect in some way to these 6 steps. And the first one is exactly what we started with today. Sorry, I'm so synchronized that my body keeps relaxing further with you. So synchronizing and resourcing. So as we form relational coherence within ourselves, between our body, our emotions, our mind, our spirit, or the larger self, we also form relational coherence in the group. And actually this coherence, I've also called it song a few times. It's like a tuning of the instruments. We tune into ourselves and we tune into each other. And growing that coherence allows more information to start flowing between us. And that is really the beginning of the journey. And we fill that song with resourcing. Because as we move forward, and we said already, we have decided to look at areas of collective trauma. We have expressed the willingness to meet a landscape of collective trauma. And there's a reason for that landscape to be unconscious trauma, because it was too intense to be processed. So we're not going to just dive into the collective trauma and allow it to flood us. We're going to be titrating throughout the journey. And we start carefully by sharing how we are touched by the area of collective trauma that we're intending to explore together. We share our intention to bring our attention to previously split off content. We share our intention to start melting the ice. And we know that we are touching the ice when we touch the symptoms of denial, repression, and resistance in ourselves and in the group. So there will be a moment in the group as we touch the ice that the voice comes up. It'll come through someone in the group. It might come up in our body, a deep sense of discomfort, of I want to turn away. I don't want to be here. This doesn't feel right. Why are we doing this? It easily expresses as a sense of distancing from the group, of maybe there's a fragmentation in the group of I experience the collective trauma this way, you that way. It might be victim and perpetrator sides being touched upon. And just as I say these words, you might already feel a thin layer of shakiness, of discomfort, of, oh, do I really want to go there? No, I don't really want to go there. Yeah, so we need to touch on that. And we need to learn to go back to resourcing and come back to that. And it's really by touching it and allowing it to be there that we can start melting into it. Yeah, and from there we move on to the individual aspect of the trauma. How was I personally touched by this field of trauma? How has it touched this nervous system, this body? Yeah, and there might be areas of collective trauma, like if we were to work on the trauma of apartheid, this body would be touched so deeply, or the trauma of sexual abuse, or it might be a trauma where I may not carry such deep scars in this body, and I might be like a fresh breath into the field of collective trauma. So we might choose to join labs that our body is very close to the topic, or labs where our body is not deeply embedded in, and we become like a window, a door. But we start by looking, how am I affected by this field of trauma? And we listen to the individual voices. And we look at, how did this specific area of trauma shape the culture, the institutions that I grew up in? How does it influence my process of othering at this time, where I feel distance, where I feel close? We just, whenever we touch the ice, we slow down and we start titrating, resourcing, titrating, staying with, slowing down. Yeah, and with that, we become able to deepen as we stay with that, and in an international lab, we might stay with stage 3 for a while. And we might go back there and then come forward to listening to the field, which is like a deepening, where we move more towards the root of the collective trauma, asking ourselves, how are my ancestors related to this area of collective trauma? What is the archaeological layers on which the current individual and collective trauma are built on? And as I dive into my personal ancestry, and again, I might find deep related trauma, or I might find resourcing and wisdom coming from my ancestors. But also through that ancestral field, I can start to feel into a collective field where generations of people went through certain experiences together. Maybe we're deeply entwined as victims and perpetrators into certain experiences. And yeah, we have a whole group of collective trauma facilitators who've been, many of them, through holding the first cycle of International Labs, and now have come back for 1.5 years of further in-depth training with Thomas Hübl, and are now ready to facilitate this next round of International Lab, but it will be part of our ongoing training. So there will be continuing supervision by Thomas. And one part that the facilitators will practice, and also as group participants we will practice, is to learn to distinguish, where do the voices come from that are coming out of the group as somebody shares. So we'll be sharing in a group setting our experiences. Are they coming from an ancestral root, from a collective beyond my immediate ancestors? Are they really speaking directly from the depth of the place where the ethical violation took place? Because at the heart of every trauma, there is an ethical violation, a transgression of sacred law that took place. And as we move through that phase, and you can imagine that that phase is hot, it's deep, it moves in us in very deep levels. And that's also why these journeys will be year-long journeys. But we'll move into a phase of integration and restoration. And where we go with this will depend on where our journey took us into the collective body. Some places the ice might be so thick that we just start melting at the surface. Some places we might be able to go deeper. But in each case, the integration of learning, we have a lot of small groups where embodied reflection can take place. And we'll also have phases of integration in each of the previous phases. So stage 4, stage 3, stage 2. And every time we loosen the effect of trauma coming up, and slowly but surely bring back sensitivity and responsiveness to our nervous system again, post-traumatic learning can start. And as the ice melts, we can slowly move towards reparation from a felt place. At the moment, we have a lot of thinking about and speaking about reparation. And often this approach to reparation tries to build a bridge before the deep acknowledgement and seeing of the depth of the ethical violation that took place. So it can only ever be a surface reparation. Yeah, and from there we move into a phase, and it might well be that some of the labs don't even get to the 6th stage. But looking at, well, coming from this journey and from this learning, what do we learn about how institutions need to be transformed to allow for deep restoration to take place? Might there be concrete projects or personal steps that we would like to take together? Yeah, and I love these next sentences. So the real grace of collective trauma integration is that the upstream of light through our ancestors, through evolution, can rise again. We are restoring the flow of light in the fabric of life. We are flooding the fabric of life with resourcing, with light. And that's the place from which we can find solutions. Also for what we are experiencing right now in the world. Yeah, so I want to end this presentation with this beautiful quote from Thomas. If everybody looks through broken glass, then together we are looking at a world that looks broken. And this is what we're looking at and through right now. If everybody looks through broken glass, then together we are looking at a world that looks broken. But when I can start to notice my crack in my window, and you notice yours, and together we start healing our cracks, then we can begin to start looking at the world through clear glass. And that's what trauma healing does. It unifies the world. Yeah, and there is a lot more information on our website also about the International Lab. So I really invite you to go to the website